If you're studying A-level philosophy and ethics, subscribe. I'm covering the entire course on this channel. Now, this is the fourth in the Situation Ethics series, and it's the most important lecture of the four. Not because it covers the most content. The previous sessions did that. This lecture is where you develop the skill that determines whether you achieve the highest grades, the ability to evaluate philosophically. AO2, Analysis and Evaluation. That is worth 60% of your marks across OCR, AQA and Edexcel. And that is not a minor component, it's the majority of the exam. And yet it's the skill that most students develop last and practice least. Now this will change that. By the end, you will not just know what situation ethics claims, you will be able to assess whether those claims hold up and construct a high-band essay argument that demonstrates exactly that. So before we evaluate anything, let us be clear about what evaluation actually means in A-level ethics, because students often confuse it with something much simpler. Evaluation is not listing strengths on the one side and weaknesses on the other. That is description with labels attached. Examiners do not reward it highly because it does not demonstrate philosophical thinking. It just demonstrates your ability to organize ideas. So genuine evaluation means making a reasoned judgment, and it means asking which objections are serious and which can be answered. It means comparing situation ethics to alternative theories and asking whether those alternative theories do better. It means reaching a conclusion and defending it with an argument. Now, AO2 across all three exam boards rewards exactly this. They all use mark schemes that distinguish between students who describe a debate and students who participate in it. And so this session will teach you to participate. The evaluative question that we are answering is, does situation ethics provide a convincing account of moral decision making? Hold that question in mind throughout and everything will follow. So before you can evaluate a theory, you need to know precisely what it is claiming. A common essay error is evaluating a version of situation ethics that is simpler than Fletcher's actual position, and then the objections miss their target. So let us be precise about what we are actually assessing. Situation ethics claims that agapē, unconditional, willed, selfless goodwill directed equally at all persons, is the only absolute moral principle. Everything else, including law, scripture, tradition, and established moral rules, is relative to the situation. The four working principles, pragmatism, relativism, positivism, and personalism, govern how the situationist approaches every moral decision. The six fundamental propositions define what love actually is and how it demands to be expressed. And the standard we are applying to evaluate this theory is the standard any serious ethical theory must meet. It must be coherent. Its claims must be consistent with each other. It must be practical. It must actually guide real decisions. It must be just. It must protect persons reliably. And it must be consistent. It must produce comparable answers in comparable situations. Keep those four criteria in mind as we work through the evaluation, because they are the measuring elements. The strengths of situation ethics are genuine. A philosophically serious evaluation begins by taking them seriously rather than dismissing them quickly before getting to the objections. Now, here we introduce the case for the theory. The next slide examines each strength in depth. Now, the case for situation ethics rests on 4 pillars. It is flexible and compassionate in a way rigid rule-based theories cannot be. It places human dignity at the moral center through personalism. It is rooted in a compelling theological tradition. And it is radically democratic and inclusive in its direction of love equally toward all persons. Now, each of these is a real philosophical achievement. Each solves a problem that other theories have created. The task of evaluation is asking whether those achievements are stable, whether the theory can deliver on its promises, not simply to dismiss them. So let us now examine each strength with the depth it deserves. Flexibility and compassion. Rigid rule-based theories can produce cruel outcomes when rules are applied without regard for the context. Consider a strict natural law position that condemns contraception even where pregnancy would endanger a mother's life. Consider a strict Kantian position that demands honesty even when telling the truth would lead to someone's death. These are not hypothetical edge cases, they're exactly the kinds of situations real people face. Situation ethics responds to them by asking what love actually requires in this specific situation. And that responsiveness is a genuine moral achievement, it's not a weakness. Number 2, personalism and human dignity. You'll remember from the justice problem session that one of the deepest criticisms of utilitarianism is that it treats persons as receptacles for utility. Well, the individual can be sacrificed for aggregate happiness. The numbers justify the harm that is done. Now, situation ethics directly answers this. Agapē attends to every person as irreducibly valuable. The individual in front of you is never a unit in a calculation. They are the reason the loving act matters at all. Placing persons above rules is not sentimentality, it is a serious philosophical advance. 3, it has theological coherence. Fletcher is not a secular philosopher smuggling Christianity out of ethics. He is a Christian theologian arguing that Christianity, properly understood, has always been about love. The book of Mark, one of the Gospels in the New Testament of the Bible, chapter 12, verse 31 says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." The other Gospel, Matthew, chapter 5, 44 says, "Love your enemies." And Paul, in the book of Corinthians, when he wrote a letter to the church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8 said, "Love never fails." Now, for religious believers, this carries genuine authority. Situation ethics does not require them to abandon their faith. It argues their faith, read correctly, already points towards agapē as the ultimate moral criterion. And 4, agapē is directed equally at all persons regardless of their background, their status, their identity, or relationship. It's the love of enemy as well as friend, stranger, and family. And this makes situation ethics one of the most morally inclusive frameworks in the entire A-level syllabus, and one that aligns with widely shared modern intuitions about human equality and worth. It is democratic and inclusive. Now we turn to the weaknesses, and the same principle applies here. We're not listing objections, we're assessing their philosophical force. The case against situation ethics rests on 6 serious objections. Some of these can be answered and some of them cannot, at least not without fundamentally revising the whole theory. Learning to distinguish between them is what produces the higher band evaluation. So here we introduce the case against, and in the next slide we'll examine each one in depth. The 6 objections are the subjectivity problem, William Barclay's objection, the self-deception problem, consequentialist uncertainty, the vagueness of agapē, and dangerous reach of proposition 5. Each strike at a different part of the theory, and together they raise serious questions about whether situation ethics can function as a complete, reliable moral framework. So let's look at the first 3 here. The subjectivity problem. Who decides what love requires? 2 people motivated by genuine agapē, approaching the same situation with full moral seriousness, may reach entirely opposite conclusions. A doctor and a patient may both be motivated by love and disagree completely about whether euthanasia is the loving act in a terminal case. The theory has no mechanism for resolving this disagreement. It cannot tell you who is right. It can only tell you both were trying to love. And that's philosophically unsatisfying at exactly the moment when clarity is most needed. William Barclay's objection argued that most people simply lack the moral wisdom to apply situational love reliably. Rules exist precisely because human judgment is fallible. Moral traditions exist because experience has shown that certain principles tend to produce good outcomes across time and culture. Remove the rules, and you do not liberate virtue, you expose weakness. Barclay is not saying love is the wrong criterion, he's saying that most people cannot be trusted to identify what love actually demands. And if that is true, the entire framework becomes dangerously unreliable in practice. And then you have the self-deception. Human beings are extraordinarily skilled at convincing themselves that what they want to do is also what love requires. We dress self-interest as compassion. We call convenient decisions loving. We rationalize, and we do this sincerely. The self-deception is often genuine rather than cynical. And Fletcher's framework offers no external check on this tendency. There's no test you can apply to distinguish genuine agapē from motivated reasoning. The theory trusts the individual completely, and history gives us many reasons to question that trust. Final 3. We look at consequentialist uncertainty. Situation ethics requires us to predict the loving outcome, but predicting consequences is notoriously difficult. A genuinely loving choice, made with full moral seriousness, may cause serious unforeseen harm. The theory judges acts by their intended consequences. But if the intention was loving and the outcome was harmful, what does situation ethics say? Well, the answer's really unclear. And then we see the vagueness of agapē. The theory's core concept is never defined with sufficient precision for consistent practical application. What does genuine, unconditional love actually require in cases involving euthanasia, just war, economic injustice, or capital punishment? Agapē is vague, exactly where philosophical clarity is most needed. A theory whose central concept cannot be defined precisely enough to guide consistent decisions cannot fully perform the function it sets out to perform. And finally, we have proposition 5, the dangerous claim. The claim that the end justifies the means. If any act can be sincerely presented as loving, the theory risks permitting moral atrocities. History offers examples of terrible things done in the name of love. Coercive interventions, forced conversions, paternalistic cruelties, all motivated by a genuine conviction that love required them. And Fletcher's response that the end must genuinely be agapē, not disguised self-interest, is important. But it relies entirely on the moral seriousness of the individual. And as William Barclay observed, that seriousness cannot be assumed. Evaluation becomes most powerful when it is comparative, when you show not just that a theory has weaknesses, but that alternative theories respond to those weaknesses in philosophically interesting ways. So when we pit situation ethics against natural law provides consistency and predictability. You know in advance what it will say about issues like euthanasia, contraception, lying. Situation ethics provides compassion and flexibility in those situations. It responds to what this situation actually requires. But both risk different kinds of injustice. Natural law can produce cruel outcomes by applying rules with disregard for the persons. Situation ethics can produce inconsistent outcomes by relying entirely on individual judgment. And the evaluative question is which kind of failure is more acceptable? And that is a question your conclusion must answer. And then we pit situation ethics against Kantian ethics. Immanuel Kant demands universalizability. The same rule must apply in every case to every person, without exception. This gives ethics rigor and consistency, but it can produce outcomes that ignore the moral weight of particular circumstances. Now, Fletcher insists every situation is unique, and this gives ethics compassion and responsiveness, but it makes systematic moral reasoning very difficult. The philosophical question is whether any moral system can achieve both universality and contextual sensitivity, and if not, which matters more? And then we pit situation ethics against utilitarianism. Both are consequentialist. Both judge acts by outcomes. But utilitarianism measures outcomes in terms of aggregate happiness, which may require sacrificing individuals for the greater good. Situation ethics insists on the irreducible value of every person through agapē. However, both of them share the same fundamental vulnerability: the problem of predicting consequences reliably. Neither theory fully escapes this. Pointing this out in one of your essays shows comparative depth. Now, this is the slide which separates a competent essay from an outstanding one, because not all objections carry equal weight. A high-band essay does not treat every weakness as equally damaging. It discriminates. It asks which objections can be answered within the theory's own framework and which cannot be resolved without fundamentally changing the theory. The answerable weaknesses. The charge of inconsistency can be deflected. Agapē remains the consistent criterion throughout the theory, even as specific acts vary. The theory is not arbitrary, it is consistently directed toward love. And that is a genuine response, and you should acknowledge it. And then there are potentially fatal weaknesses. 3 objections are not easily answerable, and you should say this explicitly. The vagueness of agapē cannot be resolved without defining love more precisely. But the moment you define it more precisely, you begin introducing rules. And that undermines the entire situationist project. The theory is caught in a dilemma of its own making. The self-deception problem cannot be resolved without introducing an external check on somebody's individual judgment. But the moment you introduce such a check, you begin constraining the situationist's freedom in ways that Fletcher explicitly rejected. Again, this is a structural dilemma. And Proposition 5 cannot be fully defended without either limiting which ends count as genuinely loving, which introduces a criteria beyond love itself, or accepting that virtually any action can in principle be justified. Most people find the second option morally unacceptable, and the first option simply changes the theory significantly. And these three objections do not just challenge situation ethics, they challenge whether it can function as a complete moral theory at all. And an examiner's instruction is clear here. Reach a reasoned, justified conclusion, not a summary. The best answers explain why one set of considerations outweighs the other. And here is the exact 5-step structure for a high-band essay on situation ethics, and use this across all the exam boards. Step 1. Introduce the debate. Frame the evaluative question clearly. What is at stake in assessing situation ethics? State explicitly that you are asking whether a theory built entirely on love can function as a complete and reliable moral framework. This signals to the examiner immediately that you understand the nature of the task. Step 2. Strengths with nuance. Acknowledge the genuine merits, the flexibility, the personalism, the theological grounding, but qualify each one. Flexibility is a strength, but it comes at the cost of consistency. Personalism is compelling, but it relies on a concept of love that's never fully defined. Theological coherence is real, but it limits the theory's reach to those who share Fletcher's Christian starting point. Nuanced strengths are worth more marks than flat ones. Step 3. Weaknesses with precision. Deploy William Barclay, the subjectivity objection, and Proposition 5 with philosophical accuracy. Name the thinker. State the objection very precisely. Explain its force. Do not just say that the theory is too subjective. Explain why subjectivity is specifically fatal in this framework in a way it might not be in others. Step 4. Comparative contrast. Use at least one comparison, natural law, Kant, or utilitarianism, to sharpen your judgment. Show what a different kind of theory does in response to the same problems. And this is what raises your essay to genuine philosophical analysis rather than a description of a single theory. And finally, step 5, justified conclusion. State your verdict and defend it. The best answers explain why the fatal objections outweigh the strengths, or argue convincingly the reverse. The conclusion must be your own reasoned judgment, not a summary of what you've already said. One sentence that takes a clear position and one sentence that defends it is more valuable than a paragraph that hedges every claim.